Thank you for joining us again for another All Israel News update. I'm Hanan Lushinsky, and today we're going to look into the crisis that is developing between what were once maybe the closest allies in the world, the US and Israel. We had a lot of developments over the past days. We're going to talk through them, and hopefully we can make a bit more sense of them. So how did we get here? In the first months, President Biden and his administration were almost completely supportive of Israel. This war, you remember, started on October 7th. Now let's start by looking back at how we got here. Remember, since October 7th, the Biden administration initially was very supportive of Israel. President Biden came here just a few days after October 7th to show his support, and he had his famous "don't" speech where he basically threatened Iran and Hezbollah and everyone else not to join in this war. Israel was very thankful for this. The politicians in Israel, the leaders, all repeated again and again how thankful they were for the US, how much the support meant just for morale and also in practical terms, just in keeping Israel secure from more attacks during its darkest hours. So this is where we started, and we can't forget this. But then, over the past several months, as the Gaza war continued and civilian casualties started to mount. Now, there is a controversy about how many people died. Large parts of the numbers that are floating around in the media are Hamas fighters, and this isn't emphasized enough. But many civilians did die in Gaza. We can't forget that also. And as these numbers continue to climb, again, mostly based on Hamas numbers, the US administration got more and more frustrated. They got angry at Israel and angry at Israel's leadership for not stopping the war or not doing enough in their mind to keep the numbers lower. And then we had several incidents. One of the latest incidents that really changed the course of the war was the accidental killing of 8 workers in the Gaza Strip by Israel. And so the Biden administration finally lost their patience, as they see it, with Israel. And the pressure really started to mount over the past weeks, especially as Israel kept talking about wanting to go into Rafah, where the last intact Hamas battalions are sitting, where Hamas's leadership probably is, and where probably most of the Israeli hostages are being kept underground at the moment. So last Tuesday, reports began breaking that the US had started to delay shipments that were already promised. Remember, a few weeks ago, Congress finally got all of the aid packages through for Ukraine, for Taiwan, and Israel was one among them. So the Biden administration, the US, promised Israel those weapons, and now the Biden administration began to delay the process of getting them out. At first, this was reported without the Biden administration saying something publicly. And then President Biden and Defense Secretary Austin just came out and said, we're delaying those shipments because of Israel's conduct. They just came out and said this, and this is just unprecedented, really. This hasn't happened ever between the US and Israel. Now, there were some similar instances in the past, and Jerusalem Post, former Jerusalem Post editor-in-chief Yaakov Katz actually said something interesting on Twitter about this. He said that this was very different. This was unprecedented and very different from the past instances where the US has delayed weapons shipments to Israel over differences of policy. For example, during one of the latest Gaza wars in 2014, the US delayed a shipment of Hellfire missiles. And another instance of this was when the US delayed a shipment of F-15 fighter jets after Israel bombed the nuclear reactor in Iraq a few decades ago. And also when the US basically stopped Israel from winning the Second Lebanon War in 2006. So this has happened before in a different way, but the public way where President Biden just came out, and Austin as well, during public TV interviews and said, we're stopping these shipments to put pressure on Israel to change its policy, to prevent it from going into Rafah, which basically means not to gain victory over its enemies, not enable to Israel to vanquish these enemies, that is just unprecedented and hasn't happened yet. So President Biden and Defense Secretary Austin kind of tried to downplay the whole thing, saying that they don't want to provide offensive weapons so that Israel can't go into Rafah, but they're going to continue to provide defensive weapons. So the rationale behind Biden and Austin's comments really are to say, they said this explicitly, we're not going to provide offensive weapons, certain kinds of weapons, heavy bombs that are going to be used in Rafah, and they're saying are feared to cause even more casualties among the civilians, but they're going to continue to provide Israel with defensive weapons to keep defending itself. But as I said earlier, this in Israel and among most supporters of Israel is just seen as the US preventing victory over Hamas and over Israel's enemies who invaded Israel and massacred over 1,000 people on October 7th. So just continuing to provide our Iron Dome missiles to defend ourselves isn't in the end going to defend Israel, it's just preventing victory. This is what most Israelis think, and that's something that the Biden administration might not understand. They sometimes in their public statements, they're talking a lot about Netanyahu and about his right-wing government, but this is a majority opinion here in Israel, that Hamas must be destroyed. Yes, some people think that getting the hostages out should be the first priority, but the second priority is still to gain victory, a clear victory over Hamas. So among Israeli officials and leaders, the reaction at first obviously was shock. I mean, as they say, shock but not surprise, right? This isn't really a surprising development. It's the continuation of things we have seen during the last weeks. There were reports that Israeli officials at first were trying to understand really what would be delayed, which shipment is going to be delayed. There are a lot of shipments, a lot of different weapon systems that are going to be delivered. As I mentioned earlier, among the weapons that are going to be delayed are especially heavy bombs with special guidance kits that are making them more precise. And Israeli officials, as I said, are scrambling to understand what exactly is going to be delayed and trying to find ways around it. Now, interestingly, Israeli politicians at first were very quiet. In the past, the Israeli government has tried to put on or give out instructions to all of his ministers not to react publicly immediately when something happens. Unfortunately, this is a very undisciplined government among some of its ministers, and this hasn't yet happened. This time, most of the ministers didn't say anything until now. Netanyahu took his time and then published a statement basically promising that Israel would continue its war, that this wouldn't stop Israel in its war efforts. Netanyahu in his remarks also brought up the War of Independence, where Israel also fought under an arms embargo, and he stressed that Israel still gained victory and will do so again. He even said that Israel is going to fight with its fingernails if it has to. I don't think it's going to come to that, but Netanyahu made very strong statements being careful not to attack the US over this, and at least not directly, but giving us clear statement of what how Israel is going to continue with or without the US help in this case. So there were some reports about what this would mean practically on the ground. It isn't clear at the moment. The IDF obviously doesn't give out its numbers of how many ammunitions of each type it has. One Israeli military official told the state broadcaster Khan News that it could, this delay, and if it continued and the US would delay other shipments, this could lead to Israel having to rely on what's called in Hebrew a munitions economy, right? This would mean that the military can't hit every target it wants to, but would have to choose between targets, to prioritize between targets, not to waste munitions, and also remember that Israel in the north is fighting a quasi-war against Hezbollah, which could escalate at any moment. So the Israeli military really has to think about how many munitions it's going to use in Gaza, what has to be ready for the north, and what has to be kept in store for future developments there. In the last few days, the Biden administration has tried to minimize the damage somewhat. There was a report also that This is something that not a lot of people know, but the US actually has weapons and ammunition stores here in Israel. The last time this came out into the media in a big way was when the US emptied some of these stores and transferred the weapons to Ukraine in one of the shipments over the past few years. So the US has weapon stores here, and the Biden administration now apparently allowed Israel more access. There are certain conditions and limits on Israel's access to those stores usually. So this is a way where the Biden administration can say we're delaying shipments on the one hand, we're allowing Israel access to those stores that are already in Israel on the other hand. And so the Biden administration, in this point, could get the best of both worlds, at least. That's what they're hoping with this. Another thing that's expected to happen over the next few days, the US had an investigation of Israel's conduct and the way they're using weapons that are being supplied by the US. So State Secretary Blinken is expected to tell Congress that Israel does use the weapons it gets from the US in accordance with international law. You might say this is somewhat in contradiction. So if Israel is using the weapons according to international law, why does there need to be a delay in weapon shipments, right? So is Israel doing something wrong, or isn't it doing something wrong? Again, this is the Biden administration trying to get the best of both worlds, play both sides, and not lose too many votes in the US over the whole issue. What is important to mention with all this is the the Biden administration's stated aim with this policy is to prevent Israel from causing too many civilian casualties. Now, as I noted earlier, the munitions that are being delayed are precise munitions, at least a big part of them. And Israel has said that it has to continue the war in any way, and this isn't surprising to the US. This is what Israel has said from the beginning. We have to gain complete victory over Hamas after October 7th. So all of this is just going to lead to Israel in the end, if the US really stops the ammunition shipments, Israel will just have to use less precise weapons, right? So even the stated aim of this policy by the Biden administration is already not achievable. So very confusing policy by the Biden administration over the past few weeks and months, really. So regarding the possible fallout of all this, we already said that Israel might have to prioritize its targets over the next few months if this embargo continues or even worsens. Inside Israel, the opposition leaders, some of them criticized the Israeli government, saying that all of this worsening of relations between the US and Israel is the government's fault. Israel had it coming, the government had it coming. And on the far left, of course, there are some people who are against the war in itself. That's a small minority, but some of them are celebrating and thanking the Biden administration for this move. Inside the government and the more right-wing politicians, despite what I said earlier, that most of them didn't react. For example, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir just put out a short statement, if you want to call it, saying that Hamas loves Biden for this policy. And he was, of course, heavily criticized for this just superfluous comment. But all of this is fueling a discussion that is happening inside the Israeli right wing, some of the far right wing, but also the more center right, over the independence or lack of independence Israel really has from the US. Israel is very dependent on US arms shipments, on munitions, on weapon systems, right? The whole Air Force, the Israeli Air Force is completely US produced, the fighter jets and everything else. So this is really fueling those discussions. So there are some people inside the Israeli right wing, some intellectuals have started talking about, we have to reduce our independence on the US. Some are even suggesting bringing up, at least publicly, to show the US that Israel could turn to China instead. This is a fringe view for now. This isn't something that's mainstream in any way. But these are the dangers that are coming out of this move. And again, many in Israel are calling for more independence. I think it's clear that after the war, Israel will start to try to produce more weapons here at home, more weapon systems, more munitions, to be more independent come the next war. And again, this policy by the Biden administration really, we're not there yet. There isn't a clear risk to the US-Israel alliance. It stays strong, and in case the administration is going to switch in the US in November, it's going to strengthen again if President Trump returns to office. But the Biden administration is playing with fire here in this case. As we said, all of this is unprecedented. It's a very interesting development. Let us know what you think about all of this. Thank you for joining us on All Israel News Update, and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video.